now you are seeing a slide in addition to my face. If that's the case, maybe you can give me a thumbs up. Yep. All right. Fantastic. And one of the things that I have learned with Zoom, and maybe you have as well, is that you can go, there's like a little line in between the slide and my face. And you can toggle that, or at least most people can on their computers, to make the slides bigger versus my face bigger. And so if you desire to see more of me speaking versus the slide, that is an option for you. Okay, so let's talk through who's leading your workshop. Well, Christina already did a fantastic job of getting us toward introduction here, so I don't need to spend a lot of time here. But just this is a visual. Sometimes we can think better in visuals than in words. And so this is kind of a conglomeration of the things I have studied over the years. And I am in this field of human communication. And I see some people on this call that are from the field of human communication too. It's great to see my colleagues. It's great to have everyone here. And all of these things have been kind of tied together by the notion of qualitative research. But most of my research has been in organizational communication and well-being, and I'm very interested too in conversation. And of course, that connects with qualitative research. And it's important to know someone's background because that's going to affect the way they approach qualitative research. I kind of find myself on the margin of both social science as well as more humanistic approaches. So when I'm in humanistic audiences, people kind of think of me as more social scientific. And when I'm in social scientific audiences, people kind of think of me as a little bit more artistic. So I'm kind of straddling those. One of the things I do want to draw your attention to, actually, I'm going to go back to the first slide here, is that that Get Your Qual On is a YouTube channel. It's a very small one. I just have 8 videos there, but if you're teaching qualitative research methods, you might take a look at Get Your Qual On if you need some material. Also, I do share a lot of resources on Twitter. And so if you are a Twitter follower, feel free to follow me. I put workshops up there from my colleagues and new articles and new ideas and so on. And a lot of what I'm going to be speaking through today is material that is freely available on my website. And so www.sarahjtracy.com, you'll see some qualitative syllabi up there if you're an instructor, different levels, undergraduate, graduate, advanced analysis, as well as a number of articles I'm going to be pointing to today. Okay. So we've talked through that and the fact that you can get some of these resources on my website. Also, welcome. We've already welcomed you a bit, but I do want to tell you a little bit about the fact that we have a huge number of people on the call. I don't know how many are on now, but 268 people are registered. And so there are a huge range of abilities, backgrounds, and so on. Some of you are experts in qualitative research and know as much as I do about qualitative research and practice qualitative research. There's others of you that are coming and maybe you are brand new to qualitative research, that you are mostly a quantitative researcher, but do find some use for qualitative research methods. We have a mix of disciplines. We also have a mix of students and faculty. And so one of the things that are great about workshops like this that I'm going to invite you to do if you have the tech savvy and are interested in doing this is to rename yourself. If you go up to the 3 dots in your picture of in your Zoom and you press on those 3 dots, you can rename yourself. And so I invite you to rename yourself, putting something about your discipline or area after your name. And that can be really helpful for me on break. I might be able to go through that and just sort of see where different folks are coming from. And it's also really interesting, I think, from a university standpoint for the qualitative research folks to know where each other are so they can find one another, because sometimes depending on what discipline you're in, you can feel quite alone in qualitative research methods. It's quite common in fields like education and communication and management and criminal justice. But there are some departments on some campuses where you might feel like you are the only one who is a qualitative researcher. And so I do see a lot of information coming in on chat. Just a note for you that I am going to be unable to take a look closely at chat throughout our time together, but Christina is going to be taking a look at that and alerting me at break time if there are things that I need to know. And also, I'll also be taking a look at that as well. I also, in addition to renaming yourself, if you so desire, you are invited to join a collective question and answer sheet. And in my experience of leading workshops, this type of document it has gotten unformatted once, but typically this type of document works a lot better than chat for doing question and answer. And that is because it's a living document and also one that we all collectively contribute to. And so you should have the link sent out to you. And Christina, maybe you can paste that link again into the chat when people join late into a meeting. They don't have the chat that is available to them until they join. And I'm going to show you as well what that document looks like. I can see already that there are 37 of you in that document. Now there's 38, 39. And so if you look at this document, you'll see it is a collective document. Everyone is welcome to contribute, and you're welcome to post both questions and answers. And you are invited and not required to place your name with the question. If you do offer an answer, please put your name with your answer. That way we'll see the variety of different answers. So I'm going to try to get on here every once in a while, and I'll refer to this when we get into our Q&A session. But if you have a question that's similar to someone else's, maybe you just place it with that question that's already been asked. And then if you have an answer to someone's question, we have 268 people potentially on here. You know, this could be a very powerful document for your university where you can see various folks' experience in terms of your question. You might have a very specific question, for instance, about IRB and qualitative research at University of Illinois, and someone there is going to be more expert about that type of question than I am. And so please feel free to use this as you would like throughout the time. And after the workshop is available, it's still going to be available. We might even make a PDF into it, and Christina might be able to send it out or make it available if it turns out into a resource that is worthwhile for folks. All right, I'm going to pause there just for a second. Christina, are there any specific questions or anything that I need to go into logistically before we jump in?
So you as the host, I think, you have the option of letting people change their names. I cannot really do that.
I see.
Co-host.
Okay. All right. Very good. Okay. I'm not going to figure that out right now, but at break time, remind me to figure that out, and then we'll be able to put people's if people want to change their name at that time.
Sorry, I actually just enabled that.
Okay.
Fantastic. Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you.
Daniel's our awesome tech guru that's here today. So thrilled that we have some support. All right. Fantastic. Okay, so with that, let's jump in. Our first session this morning is going to be covering some qualitative data analysis basics. And just to underline that our workshop today is about analysis, qualitative data analysis. That's going to be the focus of the entire day. That was through the conversation with Christina that we felt like there was the greatest need. And there could be entire workshops on qualitative data collection, for instance, but we're going to be mostly focusing on analysis and presentation today. Okay, so first we're going to jump into what is a phronetic iterative approach. And this is what we're going to be covering in this first session, a phronetic iterative approach to analysis, prepping and organizing data, and data analysis technology. So first of all, I'm going to give you a slide that is overwhelming with information, but just a reminder that you have this resource available to you. So an overview of the phronetic iterative approach is available via this article on the worksheet that you were sent. You have a link to this article, and this article is it's quite brief compared to my qualitative research methods book. However, it does go over this analysis method, and this article is available to you freely on my website. And so you can go and access it there, and it provides an overview of what we're going to be speaking about today. And it might be a resource that if you don't have it on your screen or downloaded yet, that you may want to access, because it's a resource to refer to throughout and after the workshop. So one of the main things, what is a phronetic iterative approach, is this notion that your qualitative research contributions will emerge from a mixture of both the existing theory and guiding research questions and your emergent qualitative data. So there's a lot going on in this visual. And so let me break it down in a couple different ways. First of all, this notion of phronetic or phronesis. Now, phronesis refers to practical wisdom and starting with a dilemma or problem in the research. And that's one of the main things that differentiates my approach from some, is this idea that we're starting instead of with a topic. And a lot of graduate students that I've taught over the years, they tend to gravitate toward like, oh, what's my topic or what's my domain? And I really suggest that you start with some sort of dilemma, problem, something that is a problem either in practice or in the literature. And then consider, how is it that my research might hook into that issue and help transform it, help shine a light on it, help move it toward transformation. So that is that notion of phronesis. And there's a whole lot more in my qualitative research methods book on this notion of phronesis as well. And then iterative, this iterative approach. Iterative meaning back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, right? That the contributions, you might start with some existing theory and guiding research questions, but then it quickly goes into, okay, well, what is the qualitative data saying about that? And then taking a look, okay, well, what is that qualitative data? That's going to affect, gosh, I need to look at some different theories and different guiding research questions, because this is what the data is telling me. And then this funnel metaphor. And so starting quite broad, one of the beauties of qualitative research is this idea that we do not know what we do not know. And so going in with this sort of childlike curiosity, what is happening here? Even if somebody has done a study on it, if we're studying social behavioral phenomena, it's going to change over time. So what was happening, say, like with Zoom calls 2 years ago is very different than what's happening with them now. So going in, what is happening, and letting this qualitative data then shape what we're going to be focusing on. And so this means having some curiosity, being able to be vulnerable, be able to not feel like you have it all figured out from the beginning. But then as you go through and collecting data, it gets more narrow and more narrow and more narrow and more narrow. And then plop, your study. And unlike a grounded approach, the idea, my approach is that you don't necessarily have to use all of the data that you collect. It's not about telling the entire story. It's about telling a story and opening up a story that is important for your particular research question. Okay, another defining aspect of my frenetic iterative approach is this idea that we are analyzing data along the way, and we are both reading and collecting data, reading the past theory, talking to people, as well as collecting data along the way. So reading related literatures, you collect data, listening to and reviewing the data as you collect it. Of course, there are situations where this is impossible, where we're in an immersion situation and we're not able to do that. But if it's possible to do that, because by listening it, then it tells us where the most important, most interesting space is for additional research. Writing notes, analytic asides, and memos about early interpretations and hunches, but not holding on to those hunches too closely. Don't cling to them. Still being open. It's very easy to fall in love with our early thoughts. And then after every data collection session, creating a to-do list in terms of reading and future data collection. So, okay, I conducted an interview yesterday. I have it on my my phone, and I'm listening to it the next day as I'm on my dog walk, and I'm making notes, vocal notes on my dog walk of like, oh, I really need to check out this new theory because people are bringing up color as being associated with COVID, and I don't know anything about how color is associated with the way that people understand something. And this happens to be something I'm dealing with right now in a research study where this is a new area for me. So it's like, okay, read a little bit more about that. Okay, now that I've read about that, do I need to tweak that interview question a little bit? Continually revisiting and reworking the research question. One of the things that many people not familiar with qualitative research believe is that research questions work in the same as quantitative hypotheses, that it's one and done, that we, make our research question and then that it doesn't change the entire time. But research questions in an iterative frenetic approach and in most qualitative approaches do tend to vary as we go through the study. Now, it's important to share that with our reader so the reader is not under the mythical assumption that the research question that is stated there is the one that we necessarily went in with. But it does continue to change because of that iterative approach. Okay, so as I was saying before, one of the aspects of my approach is that we, have this sort of looking at what shows up in the field. And one of the aspects of all qualitative research is this notion of bricolage. And bricolage is a French term that refers to the pieced together things. And lots of times as qualitative researchers, we go in with the best intentions of getting this perfect data set, and it just doesn't happen. Some of you might be doctoral students right now and had a beautiful plan for what your data set was going to be for your dissertation, and then wham, COVID happened and you're not able to get that. Yes, I see it. I see a few of you nodding. So being able to piece together what you do have is an art and part of qualitative research. So good qualitative researchers create beautiful meaning, even if at first it looks like trash. So it's like the qualitative researchers' responsibility to shine the light on it, put it together in a way so that it actually creates interesting, important artistic meaning. let's talk through a little bit with research questions and problems. So research questions and problems, one of the things to consider first in a qualitative study is to identify a research problem rather than a gap in the research. And a couple places in my qualitative research methods book, I go through the problems with a gap rationale. And there are a number of issues and problems with a gap rationale. Sometimes people don't study something because it's not important. And more frequently, when we hook into a gap rationale, there's always going to be that reviewer too who comes in and says, nope, somebody has studied this before, and let me tell you all the different ways that they've studied it. And so really thinking instead, like, what is a dilemma that whether or not it's been studied in the past, we still haven't really solved the situation, helped to get transform it. And I definitely recommend with research questions that you start broad with a question such as, even as broad as, what is going on here? And as I share in one of my Get Your Qual On videos, research questions serves as orienting maps. So a map is there to help you get going and help orient you to that space. But the map is not the territory. And also, when we use a map, and it might get us into a space, like maybe I have a very simple map of South Mountain in Arizona, and it gets me to start the hike. But once I start hiking in South Mountain, I might realize that I actually could really do with a better or different kind of map. One that shows more topography, one that shows the flora and fauna in that space. And so I might I might discard the first map that got me in there and go with something else, right? But I still say thank you to that first map, because I wouldn't have known about needing that second map if that first map wouldn't have helped me get into that space to begin with, right? So that's kind of the same with your research questions. If the map no longer works, get another map. If the research question is no longer serving you, not helping you get into the juicy, awesome parts of what's interesting, then it's tweaking that research question. And typically, if you were to look at one of my studies or one of my students' studies, you would see that research question change every single week that people are in the field, maybe just by a little bit. Now, not everyone's changes. Some of them stay quite constant, but many of them change dramatically, because what they thought was interesting, once they get into the field, it's not interesting at all. And just a shout out here today, one of my former STAR students, Dr. Cherie Mooney Thompson, is on the call, and some of her students are as well. She did an amazing qualitative study in one of my classes, gosh, like 20 years ago. That I've highlighted her work in my research as well. So Cherie, it's great to have you here. It's great to have your students here. And thank you so much to you and all my past students for helping me learn how to teach qualitative research. It's been through you. So anyway, so research questions. Read and listen and engage key conversations from the beginning. So one of the things that people who are solely educated in the early parts, the early versions of grounded theory, they have it that you're really supposed to be this tabula rasa, this sort of blank slate, and that you're not supposed to read the literature or talk to people until after you've gathered the data and that you've created this sort of grounded theory from it. And that's it can be a fantastic approach. I'm not denigrating that. There's tons of beautiful, purely grounded studies. And for many of us, that just cannot be practical, because we have to make sure we're hooking into a certain research or research literature. And sometimes with engaging those key conversations from the beginning with our supervisors, with our peers, with our mentors, they can help point us to the literature and areas of research that really need to be investigated most clearly. that, that they're not spending a couple years doing a grounded study and then finding out at the end, oops, oh my gosh, I found out, figured out this very interesting thing, but this is not anything new or interesting or worthwhile, right? And so that's one of the recommendations, is reading and listening to those key conversations from the beginning. Something to consider too is that research questions are more broad and complex than interview questions. And by the way, I definitely recommend, if you have my book nearby you, that you grab it and place it next to you or pull it up. I'm going to be referring a number of times to specific page numbers, different activities, different resources that are in the book. And this is a second edition, by the way. So if you have the first edition, the page numbers are not going to be exactly the same. Some of the material is the same, but probably about 25%. This was just published this last year, 2020. It is quite changed. So anyway, so here you can see a visual of how research questions are different than interview questions. And for many of you on this call, you already know this, you're very accomplished with this, but especially if you're new to qualitative research, it's really important to kind of take a look at how they're different. They're more broad. Research questions tend to employ specific disciplinary terms. So emotional deviance, what we see in research question 2 right here. Let me put my highlighter on. Pen and laser pointer. Right, so emotional deviance there, that's a term of art, that's a literature term. You wouldn't see that term in the interview questions because the participants would be like, what do you mean by emotional deviance? Right, okay. The one thing when I put my pointer on is getting back to pointer off. All right, there we go. So let's practice with some research questions. So one of the things that I encourage you to do first, and so if you have a piece of paper with you or a blank document, go ahead and open that up so you can do some practice for yourself. Is to pinpoint a research problem or dilemma you and your audience is interested in. And so in my research, I've been very interested in things like burnout. I'm interested right now in the world in things like Zoom fatigue. I've been very interested in lately what is happening in the fact that people aren't having what I'm calling shoulder-to-shoulder conversation and banter as much as they typically do because of the pandemic. Right, and that then a problem or dilemma associated with that is loneliness, isolation, a decrease in creativity, those sorts of things. Right, so think through the types of problems or dilemmas that you or your audience is interested in. Something that hopefully associates with some of your research. And it's fine to start broad. What are the challenges faced by this group? And sometimes that's the place to start and start examining that through a literature review. What are the challenges faced by the group that you want to study? And keeping in mind that research questions serve as orienting maps, you can modify them when they're no longer useful. And as you're thinking through, consider theory, practice, and evidence. So definitely look at people who have studied, researched your work in the past. So do that reading as well as that grounded space as well, the qualitative data. And research questions are broader and include more disciplinary terms than interview questions. So typically they should serve as a bridge between your article's literature review and the findings. And so any terms in your research question should have been foregrounded in that literature review. It shouldn't come out of thin air. And that's one of the early sort of challenges when learning qualitative research or any type of writing in academic spaces, is how to make sure there's this clear bridge between that literature review and the findings. And a place to look are your research questions. Is it pointing to both the theories, concepts, ideas that you're using, like emotional deviance or burnout or organizational identification, or things that I've studied in the past, and also pointing to the qualitative data at hand. So to help you determine your your research question, you can also take a look at your qualitative territory and data collection plan. So your research question helps determine your qualitative territory and your data collection plans, and also they might help you figure this out. And what I mean by qualitative territories are these things here on the left. Right, so are you using grounded theory, case study, ethnography, phenomenology, narrative, participatory action research? Okay. And you'll see here again, when you're thinking about my frenetic iterative approach, it can work with any of these territories. And some qualitative scholars, Cresswell, for instance, has a fantastic book where there's different chapters and different approaches for each of these. But what I have found is that many people new to qualitative research don't even know enough about qualitative research yet to choose one of these areas. And so I like to be able to get people to feel confident about their qualitative skills, that they get into the field, and then as they're in the field, they can kind of figure these things out as well. But in chapter 3 of my book, I go through how research questions would look different in each of these spaces, and how the paradigmatic spaces of each of these are different. I list them roughly from more post-positivistic to more humanistic. However, there's a range in each of these as well, right? You can do case study from a very post-positivistic space, or from more of an interpretive, critical, even postmodern space. Right. So take a look at this. This is one main difference between my first edition and my second edition, is articulating these a little bit more clearly. And then your research question will also help determine your data collection plans. And data collection plans could include interviews and focus groups, field work, archival, online and textual analyses, or even arts-based approaches. Okay. And then one thing I just want to shout out, again, this workshop is about analysis. However, I know that many of us are struggling with options right now for creating qualitative research during a pandemic. And so I do want to just point to a couple resources. I'm going to put the second one actually in the chat here in just a moment, because it's one that I came across since you got your worksheet. It's one of those things that came across my social media, and I wanted to share with you. So let me copy that and put this in our chat. So for those of you who are especially interested in inequalities, I will put that there. And that one is not in your worksheet, so if you want to make a note of it now, but the first one that's here is on your worksheet. So different approaches, data collection approaches in the pandemic. We've got to be a little bit creative, but qualitative researchers are good at doing that, so we can do it. I feel confident. Okay, so moving on, now that I have something up in my window, it's kind of reconfabulating all of that. Okay, so we could do a whole other workshop on data collection, but today we're focused on analysis. So what is an overview of qualitative data analysis? So here's another overview, a visual one, rather than that very detailed list that I showed you at the beginning that's available in that article. And this visual is on page 241 of the Qualitative Research Methods book. And you'll see it's starting with a focused analysis, organizing and preparing data, and learning about technologies. Okay, so we are still going to get to organizing and prepping and learning about technologies, but we are about halfway through our first session together. Boy, how time flies early in the morning. So why don't we pause here just for a moment of questions, comments, contributions. And Christina, I'm going to take a look at our shared Q&A document, but also I encourage you, if there's something specific that you see has been coming up multiple times in chat or in this document, I invite you to flag it for me.
Nothing on the chat. Most people have been asking about resources, but I see a lot of people have put some questions on the Q&A document. So if you want to ask, discuss some of those questions.
Sure. Yes.
If we have time, I mean.
Yeah, we do. Okay, I'm looking here and I'm seeing, I'm going to put this over here so that people can see what I'm seeing as well. So my students and I often lament that our findings may be boring or too simple, sometimes because they're straightforward, descriptive, and more basic thematic analysis. Oh, hi, Cherie. Thank you for your question. Can you speak to the value of both thematic analyses and more hierarchical theoretical analyses? How do you know when your data know what your data is telling you is possible? All right, Cherie, I'm going to ask you to put your microphone on, assuming that you are there and you have not skipped away to attend to something more important, and tell me a little bit more about what you mean by how do you know what your data is telling you is possible. Are you there?
Oh yeah. Hi, good morning. It's good to see you. I know, wish you were here. I think more so the beginning, that sometimes, especially starting earlier, you're just sort of applying a particular theory and your findings may be just sort of a application of the theory. And I know sometimes students are like, but this isn't enough. It's kind of boring, or I don't feel like it's moving the field. And so I still think that I try to express that I still think those studies are valuable because it's an application and it tells us something about the theory. But I think a better question is not just whether it's valuable, but how can you push your data to something more theoretical? Should you? How do you know? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it for sure does. A couple things that come to mind are that our research can be significant in a number of different ways. It can be significant not only in theoretical significance, like pushing, extending theory or a body of knowledge in a certain way, but it can also be practically significant. So perhaps the research helps the participants solve a certain problem, or it can be ethically, morally important, that it helps us clarify a moral, ethical practice in that way. Or it could be heuristic in that it drives future research. So it brings up some curiosities that other researchers can then take and go with, even if it doesn't tell us more about a theory. And then secondly, I would say that lots of times our gut, when we feel like we don't have something interesting, our gut says, oh, I need to go and gather more data, more data, more data. I guess I just need more data. And lots of times it's not the data. It's thinking back to that picture I shared with you with the bricolage and the light shining on it and the way it showed up, is that we just need a different light shining on our data, that we need a different kind of theory. Perhaps what we came up with doesn't advance a certain body of literature in any way, but it totally complicates another area of literature. And this is where being well read, talking about your research in wide spaces. Anyone who follows me on social media knows that I'm quite clear about the things I don't know that I don't know. And I say like, gosh, this is what I'm finding in my data and I don't know anything about this, or is this interesting to anyone? Because how, you know, what are some different theories or ideas that might help shape this so it is worthwhile? So that's my second thing, is to read widely, to get some other ideas. And then third of all, if we are studying human behavior, even if what we found today is the same as what we found last year, the rest of the world has changed. And so sometimes putting those in sharp relief is interesting. So I'll give you an example. One of my postdoctoral students, Tara Franks, did research on social harassment in beauty salons. And she found this ongoing awful harassment happening, both of customers and of women in the salons. And she's like, this is not new. I mean, 20 years ago, we knew that the harassment was bad. And I said, yes, but what is new is that you're doing this study in 2015, and this is still happening. There's all these things that would have us suggest that organizations have changed. And what you're seeing is that they haven't changed. And so it was the reframing at the beginning of, gosh, you know, here's been all these new laws, different policies. Now we have organizations go through trainings and all this, and still this is happening. Does that attend to your question, Cherie?
That was excellent. Thanks, Tracy. Thanks, Sarah. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. Okay, let's take another look down here. Let's see. How would you explain frenetic iterative methods in an IRB? And would you continue to add IRB amendments? Good question. When we're talking about an iterative approach, oftentimes things do change along the way. I would suggest, this is how my recommendation is to say that these are the main areas that I am going to study. And an amendment needs to be submitted, at least at my institution, only if we really change the areas. If we tweak the interview questions in small ways, then it does not require an amendment. And I also tend to do my IRB applications quite broad. So I put in all the questions I could ever imagine asking, or all the different places I ever think that I'll be gathering the data. And then as I do the study, I end up narrowing down, because I'm not going to have an interview guide that has like 50 questions in it. Okay, so and sometimes things dramatically change, and then an amendment is necessary. Shelby, does that attend to your question? I'm going to hope that it does. How do you have scientifically rigorous qualitative research questions if they are altered continually? So not every individual in your study is getting the same interview conditions that others have experienced. Yes, exactly. This is a really great question. And one of the things that oftentimes stops people from feeling like they can change. Now, the thing, scientifically rigorous, we could have a big conversation about what that means. I do point you to my article on what it means to have high quality, rigorous, qualitative research. There's an article in the piece that I shared with you, the worksheet that's called Big Tent. And rigorous is different in a subjective, qualitative, interpretive space than it is going to be in a post-positivist space. So things like the words, what even rigor means, or what bias means, or what what reliable means are very different in qualitative research. And so if you haven't read that, if you haven't been connected to what those things mean in a interpretive space, I definitely recommend taking a look at that. But it's actually, the qualitative research can be less rigorous if we're not paying attention to what really matters to our participants. So if we go in with a research question and it does not resonate, it does not really shine a light, open up, create important meaning for our participants, that can be really problematic, because then we are, as qualitative researchers, really driving our own viewpoint rather than using what is the beauty of qualitative research, which is listening closely to our participants and what's being said in the field. Okay. How does unavailability of proper internet in COVID-19 situation humanize students from marginal? Is this, I think that this, Praveen, is this one of your research questions that's driving your study?
Yeah, hey, I put the first question here. Yeah.
Fantastic. All right.
Supposed to, yeah.
Okay, Praveen, you are breaking up a little bit on my side, so I'm unable to, unfortunately, hear what you're saying. So you are welcome to write more in this question if there's something else you want me to know. But I think what we have there is an example of a research question. And if that's it, fantastic. Thank you. Okay, so those are some of the questions that have been posed so far. Just a reminder, everybody is welcome to write answers in here. And I invite all of you, actually, I'm going to take a sip of my coffee here. And in the meantime, if some of you would go back up to this, what is one or more of your guiding research questions, and put some of your examples in here, right in there, that would be great. Y'all could see what different guiding research questions might be for qualitative research methods. And thank you, Anonymous Chinchilla. That's how it's showing up on my side. I'll give you a moment to do that. Take a breath, and then we'll get back at it. Let's just take a look here. Okay, we are going to go ahead and get back to prepping and organizing the data. That's going to be our next space that we spend some time and space with. And data or organization, so imagine now you've collected, you have reams of field notes, you have interview transcripts, you have your archives, you have your digital online texts. So now it is time to start thinking about, okay, I've been reading and analyzing my data along the way. I have been, but I'm in this focused data analysis stage. So how am I going to organize all of this stuff? I have a lot of stuff. And so the way you organize it will affect how your analysis unfolds. So you want to be mindful about it. So depending on your research goals, you can group data in a few different ways. So first of all, you can group your data by participant. So especially for those of you who maybe are phenomenologists and you only have maybe 10 participants, but with each participant, you have multiple interviews, you have observations, you have some of their online data. Perhaps you organize, you have a folder for each participant where you put all of the data that is connected with that participant in that space. And of course, that's going to drive comparisons between the participants. Right? You could also organize your data by the certain group or organization. Perhaps your, in my dissertation research, years ago, I studied prisons and jails. And so I had one main prison and one main jail that I studied. And I had observed trainings in each of them. I had done interviews with correctional officers. I had done field notes in the space. I had interviewed the supervisors. And so I put all of that data in the prison and the jail. Well, as might be expected, I then had comparisons between the prison and the jail, because that's how I ended up organizing my data from the get-go. And if I might have been a little bit more mindful about it, I might have done it instead by demographic category, because years down the line, when I was publishing from this, I had a lot of questions about the differences, for instance, of the way that female correctional officers dealt with the same emotional demands than male correctional officers. And I had not organized my data that way from the beginning. And so it did not drive those types of comparisons. Now, that's not to say that you can't go back into your data and then organize it in a different way. One can also organize data chronologically and over time. And for those of you who are interested in causation, some of you might be interested in how one thing causes another. Now, there's some folks who erroneously believe that qualitative research cannot study causation. But if you want to learn about how it can, I have a number of resources, and I talk through this in the Qualitative Research Methods book, that qualitative research is good for helping us see how and why one thing led to another. And organizing one's data chronologically can be very helpful for doing this. So let's say you've done a long-term study. One of my former students, Marianne LaGreco, studied the implementation of a certain lunchroom policy when the lunchrooms where she was studying were introducing healthier foods. And over the course of the year, she collected policy documents, she did interviews, but she also hung out in kids' lunchrooms and watched what they did with their food and what they did with their healthy food. A lot of that healthy food ended up in the garbage can. But she was able, by putting them in this chronological fashion, to see how the policies either did or did not have any sort of immediate effect for what the practice was, right? And if she would have organized her data instead via theme or by participant, by group or organization, she wouldn't have been able to see that. And that article, by the way, if you want to know more about that particular sort of data analysis strategy, it is called Discourse Tracing. And it's by LaGreco and Tracy. And this is not on your worksheet, but it is on my website. So if you're interested in that sort of chronological discourse tracing. Okay. Another way to organize is to think about what are the differences that make a difference. So, you might think through your study and like, what are the differences that make a difference? And should I organize my data that way? For an example, a difference that makes a difference right now in a study I'm doing on with a team on sense making and storytelling during COVID-19 is that the interviews that we collected in May or April are going to be different than the interviews if we end up doing interviews. We're still trying to figure this out over the next couple months. So it's a time thing. We definitely, if for instance, we have one of our interview questions is, if COVID was a color, what color it would be? Or if COVID was an animal, what animal would it be? Well, those metaphors are going to change over time. And those metaphors, for those of you who are interested in metaphor analysis, really give us access to people's mental models. And so it might be for you a timing thing. Maybe it is people who, I'm going to put all of my data in one space with the people who have less than 5 years of experience in this job. And then I'm going to put all my data over here for people that have more. So just keep in mind, if nothing else, the way you organize and group your data on your computer, or whether you print it out and do it old school in notebooks, it's going to affect your analysis. Okay. Just going to look here in chat. Okay. And Jacinda also asked, please share the causation resources. There's more in my book on the ways that qualitative research can do causation. And I don't have the citations off the top of my head, but you can definitely take a look there. And if I do have time, I'll try to take a look as well. Let's see, I'm just looking at your chat here, questions. Okay, I might return to that. Okay. Let us move on to the technology that you choose to use. So technology options for organizing data. One option is manual and by hand, and do not underestimate the power of colored pencils and printing things out and highlighting. We learn in embodied ways, not just through typing. And so manual by hand approaches can be very helpful, and that's connected to arts-based and visual approaches. Where we connect things through art, sculpture, that sort of thing. I'll give you a couple of examples soon. You can also use everyday software. Microsoft Word has lots of options. Excel has lots of options. People can, if you already know a tool, sometimes that is the best tool to use. And then, of course, there are special types of qualitative software. And so let's take a look at these different ones. So first of all, color coding field notes by hand. This is how I did most of my research, all of my data analysis through probably 2005 or so, is that I use colored pencils and markers and had different colors for different concepts or different themes. I think also I used colors in Microsoft Word or highlighted. And there's something about tangentially having the material that also helps with recall as you're analyzing. Like when I did things by hand this way, I could remember making underlines or circles with different colors. And there was just a sort of muscle memory with my cognitive memory of being able to go back and find data that did a certain thing. So if you don't have a lot of data, this might be what you suggest. This is what I do with a lot of my undergraduates at this point, especially given the pandemic. You know, if they do it this way, they need to scan it in, or they're doing more of the color coding, that they're doing it via highlights and so on in word processing software. Another manual approach to analysis is what might be called tabletop categories. And so tabletop categories does not have to go with grounded theory. This is actually a picture of one of my former students who did grounded theory. And she did grounded theory for her master's thesis. And you can see, if you look really closely, cut up her manuscripts that have been highlighted and then put them in thematic categories. And you can see here with grounded theory, she is telling the entire story of what's going on. You know, in most frenetic iterative approaches, we end up not with this many piles of stuff. You know, we have main findings that attend to our research question. And for some people, this looks very exciting. And for others of you on the call, maybe this is making you have a little bit of a mini heart attack because, oh my gosh, what if a breeze comes through, or what if little Goliath jumps on the table and ruins the entire analysis? So you've got to take a look at your environment. If you have toddlers around, I definitely do not recommend this. But this is another option, this tabletop categories. And again, this is something when I'm teaching qualitative research to undergraduates that we oftentimes do. I'll have them put even just main ideas from their study on note cards, and then they start moving them around, or put them on Post-it notes, and they put them in a certain order, and then they see like, oh my gosh, so, they have a partner come in and put them in a different order and show how, like, if you organize them differently, the meaning is different. And so tabletop categories can be really useful for analysis. Some of you might be artists and want to use visual methods of manual coding. This is an actual diagram of a former student, Karen Stewart. Oh, by the way, this former student was Shauna Malvini-Redden. Some of you may have read her research on TSA and metaphor and so on. Humans cognitive. Somebody, okay. All right. So this is from Karen Stewart, and she did her research at Burning Man, that festival of Burning Man that is artistic, and she herself is an artist. And she started putting different words and ideas up on this huge blank poster in her house, and ended up creating the story of her arts-based dissertation, very humanistic, based off of the ideas that came to her and were connected through this big poster. All right. For me, I personally, this would not help me necessarily make sense of data. There's times when I've done some arts-based things, but this is something that might appeal to some of you, especially if you feel like, oh my gosh, I need to be able to see how all the ideas are connecting to one another. And as you know, you can imagine if it's on your wall all the time, lots of the times the best way we theorize is when we're doing things like taking a walk or taking a shower, that sort of thing, and having our data visible to us this way might help us create connections that otherwise wouldn't be there. And then everyday computer software, such as Microsoft Word, and we can do markup with comments. Again, as when I teach qualitative analysis to undergraduates, when they have their analysis assignment, lots of times they'll turn in something that looks like this with their themes or codes put in the comment bubbles. Because when you're first learning analysis, it's hard enough. Trying to teach somebody a brand new software at the same time is untenable. It's like, okay, we need to use the tool that you already know. However, many of you probably will be doing qualitative data analysis enough that special types of computer-aided options are going to be useful to you. All right, and I have visuals here of the four most common qualitative data analysis softwares, and that's NVivo, Atlas TI, this is Atlas TI here, MaxQDA, and Deduce. And there are new ones that are coming out all of the time. I did a Twitter post the other day about this, and I had a huge long line of responses of different new approaches, new softwares, ones that are cheaper, ones that work better on Mac versus Windows. I personally use NVivo, and that's because I was taught on it at first, and it's a tool that I use and know. It's quite detailed. It does take a lot of computer memory. But one of the things I say is this is your rule of thumb of whether it's worth it for you to do specific software. So if you have more than 100 pages of data, if you have funds, like granted funds or university funds in order to fund the software. And it may be that University of Illinois has institutional subscriptions to some of these. And so that would be something to check out. Or if you plan on doing more than a couple qualitative studies in your career. If you say yes to any of those questions, then learning the qualitative data analysis software is probably worth the learning curve cost. right? But just don't expect yourself to be able to learn a brand new analysis technique if you've never done qualitative data analysis before and a brand new software at the same time, right? Because both of them have different learning curves. And so, and one thing that is different about qualitative data analysis software than quantitative is, it's very similar to like PowerPoint slides. The PowerPoint slides here, they're helping me do the presentation here, but they didn't create the presentation for me. I still had to do all of the work of getting, everything in there. It's the same with qualitative data analysis software. It's not as though once you enter in all of your data, that all of a sudden you can push some couple buttons and then your data analysis is done. What it does do is it allows you, you can see if you look on the visual here quite clearly, to highlight parts of your data and then dump them into a certain code. And that way, then when you double click on one of these codes, it pulls up everything that you have coded to that theme, for instance. So it's kind of like, imagine this huge, big table of beautiful food, and that's your data. And it's such a long table of all the different kinds of food available that it takes a really long time to walk around it. What qualitative data analysis software is like is once you walk around it really slowly once and put all, labels on all the different food, then eventually then you can sit at the end of the table and order up exactly what you want. So like, I want all the food to come to me that includes chocolate and butterscotch and some sort of ice cream. And then it just grabs all of that and brings it right to you, like a good waiter person. So that's a little bit on how the analysis technologies work. When you're choosing a technology, you want to ask yourself, what option will help me achieve my goals? And so to answer that, consider efficiency. How quickly do you need to get the analysis done? Rigor, right? There are some that will say that using qualitative data analysis technologies can help in some ways with the rigor, but that is not an automatic. And one of my pet peeves is when people think that by putting in the method section that I used in vivo or Atlas TI, that automatically that means that you have a good qualitative data analysis. No, that might have flown like early on when it was all brand new and shiny, but at this point, most reviewers realize that the technologies do not do the analysis for you. The cost, this is especially important for graduate students. And if you do not at University of Illinois have resources, this is something to really push your administration on, because it is inappropriate and unethical and unfair for universities or departments to fund quantitative technology and software and not qualitative. And so this is something to go and push them on if you do not have access freely through your institution. And then also think through your audience expectations. There are some journals that I publish in, like Qualitative Inquiry, that have no expectation to see words about qualitative technology, but there are some journals that really expect the authors to have used some sort of specific qualitative analysis software. Okay, so in summary, this is where we've been in this first session, Frenetic Iterative Approach, how it's different than other approaches, how it serves as sort of this catch-all, a way that you can get into qualitative research even if you don't have specific expertise in case study or ethnography or phenomenology, like it can allow you to jump in. We've also talked through prepping and organizing the data and how that affects the analysis at hand. And then we've also gone over different data analysis technologies, from manual to arts-based to more specifically qualitative data analysis software. So this is where we have been. I'm going to pause there and we can spend this last 15 minutes before our first break with some more questions and comments. And so, let's see here. I think I just stopped sharing my screen. Is that right? Are you just seeing me now? Yeah. All right. Very good. So Christina, are there specific things that are coming up that you want to highlight, or shall I just go straight to that Q&A sheet?
Yeah, everyone is posting on the Q&A for the most part. So if you see
Okay.
questions that you want to address there, go for them.
Okay, sounds good. I will take a look at that and pull this over here. Okay, I think I actually am going to go back to sharing my screen so that you all know what I'm looking at the same time. There we go. Share. Okay. All right. I'm just looking at what had you show up today. Yep, we're going to get into coding. And our analysis that we're going to be going over is going to be applicable to interview data. All right. This is not something I am really familiar with, but hopefully there will be some things for you in terms of NLP methods that will be useful, but that is topic modeling is not something we're specifically covering today. Yeah, fantastic. Oh yes, I'm sad about ICQ being canceled as well. And so, yes, we'll definitely do some review of methodology. I'm definitely not going to be able to replace ICQI though. And thank you here. We see some examples of different guiding research questions from your colleagues. I'm going to just take a look at these here. There's some barriers. Yep. How do people review literature? What? Beautiful. One of the things I want to highlight from what you're seeing here in different people's research questions is the word that these research questions begin with. And these are fantastic because they include perfect qualitative words like what, how, why, how, and how. So qualitative research is very good for what, how, in what ways, and why. If when I teach undergraduates who have only had a background in quantitative research methods, they have a really hard time with not starting their research questions to what extent. So if you see something like to what extent or how much, those are not qualitative research questions. Those are quantitative research questions. So that's something to keep in mind. Thank you for all of you who have offered your research questions there. Okay. We've talked through that. Okay, so this is from Emily. There has been a push for qualitative research to be more transparent. Sometimes this includes calls to make transcripts publicly available, but this often risks relationship between researcher and participants or violates IRB agreements. How do you recommend qualitative researchers approach transparency without necessarily making transcripts publicly available? Emily, this is a fantastic question, and it's one that is not going to go away. I think with this push toward open science and so on, there are more and more folks who are saying, gosh, we need to share our data sets with one another. But it is a judgment call on terms of the ethics of doing so. If by sharing our transcripts, we'd end up deductively disclosing our participants, meaning that even if they're in part de-identified, people are able to figure out who they are, especially if they are in low power or in marginalized positions. That is an ethical issue that really needs to be paid attention to. There are measures for de-identification or strategically re-identifying or conglomerating the data in ways so that people might not be able to identify that might be useful. But typically, if things are going to be published later on, not only do we need our participants' approval for that, but we also need to have that put through IRB. And so one of the things too, I would say, Emily, you use this word transparent. However, there's lots of ways to be transparent. Sharing our data and all of it with everyone in a public way is just one of the ways. Other ways to be transparent are to share our own challenges and our subjectivities in terms of gathering the data, to be clear with the reader about any specific agendas or participant agendas that ended up shaping the findings. So transparency can mean a lot of different things. And in that qualitative big tent criteria, transparency is actually one of the aspects of how to create good qualitative quality research. And I go through a number of ways to be transparent in that space. So you can take a look there. Is it necessary to label your qualitative research with theories if qualitative research is fluid and changing in nature? Can you share your experience of how you choose a research theory or if the research questions are across the theories? So most of my early research questions are not completely theoretically driven. And when I say mine, I'm saying that is Sarah Tracy, just the personal researcher, rather than Sarah Tracy, the expert on qualitative research. You know, there are times when I wish Sarah Tracy, the personal researcher, was a little bit more theoretically driven. I think it would have made my publishing life maybe a little bit easier and maybe fewer revisions across time. But it's perfectly fine to go into a space and the early versions of grounded theory suggested that you should totally go into a space without any notions of pre-existing theory and how you're going to build it. And grounded theory, even the more advanced and kind of more flexible models now suggest that the idea is that we come up with a theory of what's happening in that space. So we use the data itself to create an explanation of the phenomena. And this is a real simple example, and it just happens to be on my mind because I listened to a podcast recently by Brene Brown. But Brene Brown, she is trained in grounded theory, and that is what she continues to do. So when you read a book from Brene Brown, and certainly this is not in a scholarly space, it's more in a popular space, but it's still research driven. When you read a book from her on leadership, she's not going into that field with a bunch of theories of leadership and then trying to either prove them or extend them or critique them. She's going in and seeing what the participants say about leadership and then building her own theory of leadership around that. And her latest work is related to the importance of courage and vulnerability in leadership. Right. And so you can see there that she's building a theory from the qualitative research rather than going in with those theories in mind. Now, for many of us, though, if we want to be published in some of our primary journals, in my field, communication monographs, for instance, we've got to speak to the conversation of the field and extend or somehow critique the theories at hand. And so in that case, it is important at some point for those research questions to hook into some sort of theoretical space. However, as I'm going to be going through at the end of today on how we present our qualitative research in journal articles, is that oftentimes those qualitative journal articles, they have a shorter literature review and a much longer findings and implications. So sometimes the theory part of it comes in at the end as much or more than at the beginning. Yali, can you say whether that's, if you are on, can you take your
Yes,
microphone
thank
off?
you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Okay. General question, what suggestions you have for solidifying emerging conceptual? Okay, I'm going to come back to, I'm looking, I have 3 minutes left and just looking at the other questions that we have here. We're not going to be going over detail and metaphor analysis today, but I can point to you all right in here some articles that I've written, or if you just go to my website and do a search on metaphor, you'll see a couple articles and book chapters that kind of talk through metaphor analysis. And hopefully I'll have another article coming out on that soon. Best practices to do qualitative data analysis with a research team. Those qualitative softwares can definitely help. And I will consider this as we go forward today, this question. And then one specifically on technology. Great. This is a great crowdsourced question. I encourage you, if you have ideas, answers to this, to place them here. So different ways that all of you have combined technologies or different programs in order to analyze your qualitative research. Take a look there. I know for me, I use Microsoft Word and In Vivo a lot. And then just going back here, what suggestions do you have? Colonel Daggett, I am going to need some more explanation on this question.
Sure, Doctor. Basically, during the course of your studies, have you found yourself in situations where you really felt that you were going to need to challenge the social science discipline with some of the things that you were now, some of the emerging concepts that you were coming in contact with, and how did you handle that?
Yeah, typically, my research will extend in a little way, or it might critique or change it in some way. And so I think especially if it's challenging, and I think that's what you are, the spirit of your question is really important, I think, to honor the past researchers that have gotten you thus far. So typically for us to be able to get to the point of challenging, we wouldn't have been able to even figure out what the challenge was if they wouldn't have originally done that research. And so my recommendation is to write in a generous tone where we, as one of my former students, Elizabeth Richards said, she said, we don't stand on the shoulder of giants only to pee on their head. Which is kind of graphic, but gets to this, that we want to honor them, but also good science, things change over time. And it's not, and it's framing it so like, isn't this interesting? It's different. And it's not necessarily that past people had it wrong, but it was because of the context they were in, or the theories or notions that were available to them. And now that we are in a different space and we know better, we're able to see in a different way.
So seek to honor the past, but also maintain the integral aspect of pushing the envelope as well.
For sure. Yeah, I couldn't have said it better. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Well, no, thank you, Doctor. Thank you.
Yeah. Yes. All right. Well, it is 8:30. Well, it's 8:30 my time. It is 10:30 your time. And so it's time for a break. So I will see you back here, hopefully in 15 minutes. All right. See you soon. And Christina, if there's anything you'd like me to know, please feel free to private message me in the chat box.